Admiral Tejo stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching the last transport ships leave New Geneva Station. His hands gripped the metal rail as he saw alien soldiers already moving into the empty human quarters. The station that humans had built with their own hands was now being claimed by the very species that had voted them out of civilized space. The communication panel crackled to life, and Ambassador Jinwoo appeared on the screen. His face looked tired, but his voice stayed strong as he spoke from the Coalition Council chambers one final time. Behind him, alien representatives were already celebrating their victory over the humans they called too dangerous for peaceful space. "Admiral, the vote is final," Jinwoo said quietly. "Every major species voted for our expulsion except the Terran delegation and 3 minor worlds who abstained. The Velthrons led the charge, and the Zenthari followed. Even the Korriban, who we saved from the plasma storms 5 years ago, voted against us." Tejo nodded slowly. "What was their final reasoning, Ambassador?" "They say we are too aggressive and unpredictable for galactic society. They claim our military responses are excessive and our expansion too rapid. The Velthron delegate Kikstal stated that humanity represents a clear threat to galactic peace." Jinwoo paused and looked directly at the camera. "They mistake our strength for brutality and our caution for paranoia." In the council chambers behind Jinwoo, the alien representatives were already discussing how to divide human territories among themselves. The Velthrons wanted the mining worlds, while the Zenthari claimed the agricultural planets. None of them seemed to consider that these worlds belonged to billions of human families who now had to find new homes in unknown space. Captain So Young entered the bridge carrying a datapad with the final evacuation numbers. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes showed the exhaustion of coordinating the largest population movement in galactic history. 300 million humans across 57 worlds, all being forced to leave within 30 standard days. "Sir, the last civilian transport just cleared the station perimeter," she reported. "All human military assets are accounted for and ready for departure. The alien inspection teams found nothing they could claim as Coalition property." "Good," Tejo replied. "Make sure our records are complete. Every slight, every betrayal, every species that voted to throw us out. History will remember this day, Captain, and so will we." The bridge crew worked quietly around them, processing the final preparations for departure. These were good people, Tejo thought. Veterans who had served the Coalition faithfully for decades, now being cast out like criminals. Lieutenant Yuri monitored communications and reported that several alien fleets were already moving toward human space to claim the best territories. On the main screen, New Geneva Station grew smaller as the human fleet moved away. The station's lights still glowed, but they would soon be replaced with alien technology. The gardens that human children played in would be torn up. The memorial walls honoring human soldiers who died defending Coalition worlds would be melted down for scrap metal. Dr. Hyun-sik worked in his laboratory aboard the medical ship, downloading every piece of research data humanity had shared with the Coalition over the past century. Cancer treatments that saved millions of alien lives, agricultural techniques that ended famines on 12 worlds, faster-than-light communication improvements that connected the entire galaxy. All of this knowledge was being copied before they left, because Hyun-sik suspected the aliens would claim human discoveries as their own within a few years. "Doctor, we need to move faster," his assistant called out. "The Zenthari are demanding access to our research facilities before we leave." "Let them demand," Hyun-sik replied calmly. "We shared this knowledge freely when we thought they were allies. Now they can develop their own solutions." Back on the flagship, Ambassador Jinwoo was preparing to deliver humanity's final statement to the Coalition Council. He had spent hours writing words that would express human dignity without giving the aliens any satisfaction. The speech needed to be remembered by both humans who were leaving and aliens who were staying. Jinwoo walked to the podium in the council chambers one last time. The alien representatives looked eager to hear humanity beg for mercy or promise to change their ways. Instead, Jinwoo stood straight and spoke with quiet authority. "Honored delegates, humanity accepts your decision to expel us from Coalition space. We leave not because we admit wrongdoing, but because we respect your choice as sovereign species. However, let our final words be clear. You mistake our restraint for weakness and our cooperation for submission. The Velthran delegate Kixtal made a dismissive gesture with his tentacles. Empty threats from a defeated species. Good riddance to your aggressive nature, Jinwu continued as if the alien had not spoken. We have shared our knowledge, protected your worlds, and died alongside your soldiers in defense of coalition ideals. In return, you have chosen fear over friendship and suspicion over trust. This is your choice to make, but remember that choices have consequences. Are you threatening us, human? Demanded the Zenthari representative. We make no threats, Jinwu replied. We simply remind you that the galaxy is large and dark and full of dangers you have not yet imagined. Today you cast out the species that stood between you and those dangers. Pray we never choose to return. With those words, Jinwu left the council, chambers forever. Behind him, the alien delegates laughed and began dividing up human assets with the eagerness of scavengers picking over bones. They saw only profit and territory, not the protection they were losing. Commander Minsu monitored the edge of human space from his reconnaissance ship. Already, alien fleets were crossing into territories that had been human for generations. They moved with the confidence of conquerors, but Minsu noticed they traveled in small groups. These species had grown soft under human protection, never realizing how many threats humanity had quietly handled in the dark spaces between stars. Engineer Da Yun supervised the dismantling of early warning systems that humanity had built throughout coalition space. These sensors had detected dangerous asteroids, prevented solar flare damage, and watched for signs of hostile alien species from outside the galaxy. Now the aliens could build their own detection networks or learn to live without protection. Ma'am, should we leave the maintenance protocols for the deep space monitoring stations? Asked a young technician. No, Da-un replied. If they want our protection systems, they should have kept us around to operate them. As the human fleet gathered at the edge of known space, Admiral Tae-ho received reports from all sectors. The evacuation was complete. No human civilians remained in coalition territory. The military ships were loaded with supplies and equipment for a long journey into unexplored regions. Captain So-young approached with the final departure order. Sir, all ships report ready for jump to dark space coordinates. The lead scouts have identified several promising systems beyond the galactic rim. Tae-ho nodded and activated the fleet communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Tae-ho. Today we leave the space our ancestors explored and the worlds our families called home. We go not as exiles but as pioneers seeking new frontiers. The coalition has chosen to fear what we represent, but we will not let their fear define us. He paused, looking at the stars that no human would call home again. Remember this day. Remember how we were treated despite our loyalty. Remember who stood with us and who cast us out. The galaxy is vast, and we will find our place in it. But we will never forget. The human fleet jumped into dark space, leaving empty systems behind. The aliens celebrated their victory, not knowing they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. 5 years passed in the dark space beyond the galactic rim, and humanity had adapted to their new existence far from the lights of civilization. Commander Minsu guided his reconnaissance ship through the void between stars on what had become routine patrol duty. The human settlements built in this empty region needed constant monitoring to ensure their safety from unknown threats. His ship moved silently through space that no other species had ever explored. The darkness here was complete, except for distant galaxies millions of light years away. But as Minsu checked his sensors, something appeared that made his blood freeze. Massive structures were emerging from the deepest parts of space, heading directly toward the galaxy that had expelled humanity. Communications officer, contact Fleet Command immediately, Minsu ordered as he stared at the readings. Tell them we have a code black situation out here. The structures were unlike anything in the databases. They measured hundreds of kilometers long and seemed to be made of materials that bent space around them. Worse yet, there were thousands of them moving in perfect formation, like a vast army marching toward war. Lieutenant Yuri worked frantically at her console, trying to analyze the energy signatures. Sir, these readings don't match any known technology. The power output is off the charts, and the hull composition is showing properties that shouldn't be possible. Minsu ordered his ship to maintain distance while gathering as much data as possible. Through powerful telescopes, they could see the structures more clearly. They looked like enormous insects made of metal and energy, with surfaces that seemed to shift between solid matter and pure light. Whatever these things were, they had been, traveling through empty space for a very long time. Back at the main human settlement, Engineer Daun received the reconnaissance data with growing alarm. She had spent years studying the strange properties of dark space, but nothing had prepared her for these readings. The structures appeared to exist in multiple dimensions at once, making them nearly impossible to understand with conventional physics. These ships can phase through normal matter, she explained to the Emergency Council. Our traditional weapons and shields would be completely useless against them. They operate on principles we barely comprehend. Dr. Hyun-sik examined the biological aspects of the data and made an even more disturbing discovery. These aren't ships in the normal sense. They're a form of machine consciousness that treats organic life as raw material. The energy patterns suggest they harvest entire civilizations to fuel their expansion. Admiral Tae-ho studied the projected course of the alien structures with growing dread. They're heading straight for Coalition space. At current speed, they'll reach the outer colonies in 18 months. The debate that followed was intense. Some humans argued that the Coalition deserved whatever fate awaited them after casting humanity out so cruelly. Others maintained that letting entire species die without warning would make humans no better than the monsters approaching. Captain Wu Jin spoke for the faction that wanted to warn the Coalition. We're still human. We don't let genocides happen even when the victims treated us badly. That's what separates us from these machine things. The Coalition made their choice, replied Commander Sang-woo. They decided they didn't need human protection. Let them face the consequences of that decision. Captain So-young accessed the historical files and found references to similar entities in the oldest galactic records. These are called the Void Swarm in ancient texts. They're mentioned in legends from species that went extinct millions of years ago. The records say they sleep in the spaces between galaxies and wake only when disturbed. Then our expansion into dark space woke them up, Engineer Daun realized. We've been exploring deeper into the void than any species in recorded history. Our activities must have triggered some kind of response. The implications were staggering. Humanity's exile had led them to discover a threat that could destroy all life in the galaxy. The very aggressiveness that the Coalition feared in humans had driven them to explore regions where ancient nightmares lay sleeping. After much debate, Admiral Tae-ho made the decision to send a warning. Despite everything the Coalition had done, to humanity they didn't deserve to face extinction without knowledge of what was coming. The message would be transmitted through Lieutenant Yuri, who had maintained contacts with Coalition intelligence despite the expulsion. Yuri composed the warning message carefully, knowing it might be the last communication between humanity and their former allies. Coalition Command, this is Lieutenant Yuri of the Human Federation Fleet. We are transmitting critical intelligence regarding an existential threat to all galactic civilizations. The message included detailed scans of the Void Swarm ships, along with analysis of their capabilities and projected arrival time. Yuri explained that conventional Coalition weapons would be ineffective and that immediate evacuation of outer colonies should begin. The entities approaching your space are ancient machine intelligences that harvest biological life for energy. They phase through normal matter, making traditional defenses useless. Only technologies developed in deep void conditions show any potential for effectiveness against their capabilities. The final part of the message was Admiral Tae-ho's personal warning. This is Admiral Tae-ho speaking directly to Coalition leadership. 5 years ago, you cast us out, believing we were too dangerous for civilized space. Now true danger approaches, and you will need every advantage to survive. Consider this your first and final warning from humanity. The transmission was sent through encrypted channels to multiple Coalition facilities. Yuri used old access codes that should still be valid to ensure the message reached High Command. All humanity could do now was wait for a response and hope the aliens would take the threat seriously. The Coalition's reply came within days and was exactly what the humans had expected. Admiral Krelthon of the Zenthari Defense Force dismissed the warning as human propaganda designed to force their way back into galactic society. The Velthran leadership accused humanity of fabricating the threat using advanced technology to create false sensor readings. The humans are desperate to return and will say anything to make us believe we need them, declared Kickstall in a public broadcast. This so-called ancient threat is nothing but human deception at its most pathetic. Other coalition species followed, the lead of the major powers. The warning was classified as psychological warfare, and all human communication frequencies were blocked to prevent further contact. Within a week, the entire coalition had convinced itself that the Void Swarm was just another human lie. Director Hei-Wan monitored coalition communications from her intelligence station and watched the aliens dismiss evidence that could save their lives. They're going to ignore every warning until the first colonies disappear. Pride and fear are making them blind to reality. Then we prepare for what comes next. Admiral Tae-ho replied grimly. If they won't listen to warnings, they'll have to learn from experience. Humanity began developing new technologies specifically, designed to fight the Void Swarm. The years in dark space had taught them to work with quantum uncertainty and dimensional phase shifts. While the coalition relied on energy shields and particle beams, humans were creating weapons that could affect entities existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Engineer Da-un led research teams working on quantum disruption devices that could force the swarm ships back into normal space where they might be vulnerable. Captain So-young oversaw tactical development, focusing on hit-and-run attacks that took advantage of humanity's smaller, faster ships. We can't match their numbers or raw power, So-young explained to her officers. But we can be where they don't. Expect us, and strike at weak points they don't know they have. The human settlements became vast research and development centers, as every citizen contributed to preparing for the coming war. Children learned advanced physics, while artists designed camouflage patterns that could hide ships in dimensional fold space. Everyone understood that survival depended on innovations the rest of the galaxy couldn't imagine. Commander Min-Su continued monitoring the Void Swarm's approach and reported their progress to Fleet Command. The ancient machines maintained perfect formation as they crossed the empty space between galaxies. Their course never wavered and their speed never changed. They moved with the patience of entities that had been traveling between stars since before most species evolved intelligence. 18 months until they reached Coalition space. Min-Su reported, the outer mining colonies will be hit first, followed by the agricultural worlds. If the pattern holds, they'll harvest inhabited systems for energy before moving toward the core worlds. Back in Coalition space, the aliens continued their normal lives, unaware that annihilation was approaching. Trade ships carried goods between systems, while diplomatic missions negotiated minor territorial disputes. The early warning systems that humans had built were either shut down or stripped for parts by species that saw them as unnecessary expenses. Captain Wu Jin watched long-range sensors that showed the slow death of galactic civilization approaching like a cosmic storm. They have no idea what's coming. When the swarm arrives, it will be like watching children try to fight a volcano. Then we prepare to do what humans have always done, Admiral Tae-ho replied. The first attack came without warning, exactly as humanity had predicted. Admiral Krelthon was reviewing routine patrol reports when his communications officer received frantic transmissions from the Zenthari mining colony of Vextar. The messages made no sense at first because the colonists were reporting ships that could not be seen or touched by conventional weapons. Admiral, something is wrong with these reports, the communications officer said nervously. The colonists claim they are under attack, but our sensors show nothing in that system. Krelthon ordered a battle group to investigate, but by the time his ships arrived at Vextar, there was nothing left but empty space. A thriving colony of 50,000 Zenthari had simply vanished, leaving no debris or trace of what had happened. The only evidence was strange energy readings that made no sense to Coalition scientists. Similar reports began flooding in from across the galactic rim. Mining stations disappeared overnight. Agricultural colonies went silent in the middle of transmitting normal status reports. Small defense outposts simply stopped responding to calls without any distress signals or evidence of battle. Director Hei-Wan monitored Coalition emergency broadcasts from humanity's hidden observation posts in the void. Every species that had voted for human expulsion was now experiencing the first taste of what approached. The irony was not lost on anyone in the human fleet. The Velthrons just lost 3 colonies in the span of 6 hours, Hei-Wan reported to Admiral Tae-ho. Their defense forces are completely confused because they can't target something they can't detect. The Void Swarm moved through Coalition space like a plague, consuming everything in its path. The ancient machines showed no interest in negotiation or conquest. They simply harvested entire civilizations for raw materials and energy before moving on to the next target. Worlds that had existed for millions of years were stripped clean in a matter of hours. General Dong Hyun studied the attack patterns from humanity's strategic command center and confirmed what they had feared most. The swarm is targeting inhabited systems first. They need biological energy to fuel their expansion, so they're consuming the most populated worlds before moving to infrastructure targets. Captain Jae-min piloted a stealth reconnaissance ship to the edge of Coalition space to observe the destruction firsthand. What he saw through long-range sensors would haunt him for the rest of his life. Entire star systems were being drained of energy as the Void Swarm ships phased through planets like ghosts, extracting the life force from every living thing. "Command, this is Jae-min reporting from Sector 7, he transmitted on encrypted channels. "I'm watching the Caribbean homeworld being harvested. The swarm ships are inside the planet somehow. They're pulling energy directly from the core while the surface population dies." The Coalition's response was exactly what humanity had expected. Instead of adapting their tactics to fight an enemy, they couldn't understand the aliens simply threw more conventional forces at the problem. Massive fleets armed with particle cannons and energy shields moved to intercept the swarm only to watch. Their weapons pass harmlessly through enemy ships. Scientist Bora analyzed the combat data from Coalition military frequencies and shook her head in frustration. "They're using the same tactics that worked against normal enemies. They can't accept that the fundamental rules of warfare have changed." The humans had spent 5 years in dark space, learning to think differently about physics and reality. While Coalition species relied on centuries of established military doctrine, humanity had been forced to develop entirely new approaches to survival in an environment that operated by different rules. "The Coalition builds weapons to destroy matter," Bora explained to her research team. "But the swarm exists partially outside normal space. You need weapons that can affect quantum probability fields and dimensional anchor points, not just physical structures." Captain So Young coordinated humanity's military preparations as reports of Coalition defeats continued to arrive. Every human ship was being retrofitted with quantum phase weapons and void-walking technology developed during their exile. The modifications were complex and dangerous, but they offered the only hope of fighting an enemy that conventional forces couldn't even touch. "We have maybe 6 months before the swarm reaches the core Coalition worlds," So Young told her fleet commanders. "After that, it will be too late to save anything significant." The desperate Coalition leadership finally began to acknowledge that their original assessment of the threat might have been wrong. Kixtal, the Veltron delegate who had led the campaign to expel humanity, now broadcast pleading messages on all frequencies, hoping the humans would respond. "We were wrong about our threat," Kixtal admitted in a transmission that reached human monitoring stations. "This enemy is beyond our understanding. If any humans receive this message, we ask for your knowledge of how to fight them." But the galaxy's communication networks were failing as the swarm advanced. Relay stations went dark, and subspace channels became corrupted by strange energy signatures. Even if humanity wanted to respond, the infrastructure for long-range communication was being systematically destroyed. Admiral Krelthon made increasingly desperate attempts to organize Coalition resistance, but his fleets were being annihilated without inflicting any damage on the enemy. Traditional military strategies based on firepower and shields were completely useless against entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We need new weapons, new tactics. Everything we know is worthless," Krelthon transmitted to surviving Coalition forces. "Request any available intelligence on enemy vulnerabilities or alternative combat methods." The answers he needed existed in human databases, but the aliens had cut off all communication with humanity years earlier. Now, when they needed human knowledge, the bridges had been burned, and the distance was too great for messages to reach across the void. Engineer Da-un monitored the Coalition's failing attempts to adapt their technology. "They're trying to modify their shields to block quantum phase attacks, but they don't understand the underlying principles. It's like watching someone try to build a starship with Stone Age tools." The swarm continued its relentless advance, consuming system after system with mechanical efficiency. Ancient worlds that had been centers of galactic civilization for millions of years were reduced to dead rocks in a matter of hours. Art treasures and historical archives accumulated over countless generations were converted into raw energy to fuel the machine's expansion. Captain Wu Jin led a reconnaissance mission to observe the destruction of Galactic Central, the Coalition's capital system. Through stealth technology developed in dark space, his ship was able to approach close enough to record the final moments of galactic government. Command, I'm watching the swarm enter Galactic Central's outer atmosphere, Wu Jin reported with horror in his voice. The emergency evacuation ships can't escape because the swarm vessels are intercepting them through dimensional phase shifts. The Coalition's greatest cities, where billions of beings had lived and worked for generations, were being consumed by entities that viewed organic life as nothing more than fuel. The swarm showed no cruelty because that would imply emotion. They were simply efficient in their harvest of biological energy. The capital defense fleet is making a final stand around the government complex, Wu Jin continued. Admiral Krelthon is leading a suicide charge with everything he has left, but the weapons aren't even slowing them down. Through his ship's sensors, Wu Jin watched as the last Coalition fleet threw itself at the Void Swarm in a desperate attempt to buy time for evacuation ships. Brave aliens died by the thousands firing weapons that had no effect, while ancient machines moved through their formations like hungry ghosts, consuming everything in their path. The final transmission from Galactic Central was broadcast on all emergency frequencies as the planet's surface began to die. This is the Coalition emergency command to any surviving forces. The capital has fallen. Government authority is transferred to any military commander capable of organizing resistance. Remember us. Then the signals went dead and another billion souls joined the countless trillions that had already been consumed. The galaxy's lights were going out one by one as the swarm spread across civilized space like a cosmic cancer feeding on the life force of entire worlds. Director He Wan compiled the final intelligence reports as the last Coalition strongholds. Prepared for their end, 70% of inhabited systems have been harvested. The remaining Coalition forces are scattered and demoralized. They're requesting evacuation assistance, but there's nowhere left to run. In the darkness beyond the galactic rim, humanity watched the destruction of everything they had once helped to protect. The species that had cast them out as too dangerous were learning what real danger looked like. But the lesson was coming too late for most of them. Admiral Teho stood on his bridge, looking at the dying lights of distant stars, and made the decision that would define humanity's future. Prepare the fleet for combat operations. We're going back. Fleet Admiral Su Jin convened the Human War Council in the depths of the void, where their civilization had rebuilt itself over 5 years of exile. The chamber was filled with representatives from every human settlement and military unit now, faced with the most important decision in their species' history. Outside the observation windows, distant stars died as the Void Swarm continued its relentless harvest of galactic life. The debate began immediately with Counselor Young Ho speaking for those who wanted humanity to remain in exile. We owe the Coalition nothing. They cast us out when we offered friendship and protection. Let them face the consequences of their choices without our help. His words carried the anger and pain that every human had felt during the expulsion. Families torn from their homes, soldiers dishonored after serving loyally for decades, scientists whose discoveries had saved alien lives being treated like criminals. The wounds were still fresh despite the years that had passed. They called us too dangerous for civilized space, Young Ho continued with bitter satisfaction. Now they face something truly dangerous and suddenly remember they need us. Where was their gratitude when we stopped the Caribbean plague or defended the outer colonies from raiders? Minister Yeon-jung rose to speak for the opposite position, and her voice carried the moral authority of someone who had devoted her life to humanitarian service. We're better than they are, and that's exactly why we should help them. If we let billions die out of spite, we become the monsters they claimed we were. She reminded the Council of the fundamental values that had driven human expansion into space. We explored the galaxy not for conquest, but for discovery. We defended alien worlds not for payment, but because it was right. These principles don't change just because others have failed to live up to them. The chamber erupted in arguments as years of suppressed emotions came to the surface. Some humans had lost everything when the aliens forced them to leave. Others had family members who died defending Coalition worlds only to be dishonored by the same species they had protected. The pain was real, and the desire for revenge was understandable. Colonel Sang-woo presented the military assessment that added cold reality to the emotional debate. We can defeat the Void Swarm, but the cost will be enormous. We'll have to reveal our quantum weapons technology and void-walking capabilities. Everything we've developed to survive in dark space will become known to potential enemies. The strategic implications were staggering. Humanity's technological advantages had been developed through necessity during their exile. Sharing these capabilities with other species would eliminate the edge that might be needed for future survival. It was asking humanity to make itself vulnerable to help those who had betrayed them. Our stealth technology alone is worth more than all the Coalition worlds combined, Sang-woo explained. If we use it to fight the swarm, other species will study our methods. In 50 years, they might use our own innovations against us, Captain. So-young brought up another concern that weighed heavily on military minds. The surviving Coalition forces are scattered and demoralized. Even if we save them, what guarantee do we have they won't turn on us again once the threat is over? The question hung in the air because everyone knew the answer. Alien species had already proven they would abandon humanity when it suited their interests. History suggested they would do so again once they no longer needed human protection against the swarm. Ambassador Kyung-min had been monitoring the last Coalition transmissions, and she brought disturbing news to the Council. The communication networks are almost completely destroyed, but I intercepted a final message from the Terran Embassy on Zenthari Prime, HFY. Activated the recording, and the voice of Ambassador Cho-hee filled the chamber. This is the last official transmission from Coalition space. The government has collapsed, and military resistance is ending. To any humans who receive this message, please remember that some of us tried to stand with you. Some of us knew what you really were. The message continued with growing desperation. The aliens are paying for their mistake, but so are the innocent children who had no voice in the decision to expel you. If there's any mercy left in human hearts, please don't let fear and pride destroy what remains of galactic civilization. The recording ended with the sound of alien evacuation alarms in the background as Cho-hee and everyone around her prepared to die. She had served as humanity's advocate until the very end, knowing that her loyalty would cost her life when the swarm arrived. Commander Min-soo spoke next, addressing the practical challenges of any rescue mission. Even if we decide to help. Them we're 5 years travel from Coalition space at maximum speed. By the time we arrive, there might be nothing left to save. Not necessarily, Engineer Da-yoon interjected. The quantum tunnel technology we developed for deep space travel could get us there in weeks instead of years, but using it will drain our power reserves and leave us stranded if the mission fails. The technological solution was typical of human innovation, but it came with risks that could doom their entire civilization. If the rescue attempt failed, humanity would be left without the resources to retreat back to dark space. They would be committed to victory or extinction. Dr. Hyun-sik provided medical perspective on the humanitarian crisis. The swarm is harvesting biological energy, which means they're essentially eating entire populations alive. Every hour we delay means millions more deaths. From an ethical standpoint, we have a responsibility to act. Ethics are a luxury for species that can afford them. Young-ho replied sharply. We're talking about risking human extinction to save aliens who treated us like criminals. That's not ethics, that's suicide. The debate raged for hours as representatives argued over duty versus survival. Some pointed out that humanity had always defined itself by its willingness to help others regardless of personal cost. Others argued that such idealism was what had led to their expulsion in the first place. General Dong-hyun brought military realism to the discussion. If we don't stop the swarm here, they'll eventually consume the entire galaxy, including whatever part of space. We claim next. This isn't just about saving the Coalition, it's about preventing total galactic extinction. Captain Jamin supported this analysis with intelligence data. The swarm's behavior patterns suggest they won't stop after harvesting Coalition space. They'll continue expanding until they've consumed every available energy source. Hiding in dark space only delays the inevitable. Lieutenant Yuri raised her hand to speak, and the chamber fell quiet, because everyone knew she had maintained the closest contact with Coalition forces during the exile. I've been monitoring alien Communications throughout this crisis, and there's something you all need to know. She activated her datapad and projected casualty estimates onto the chamber's main screen. Conservative calculations suggest 800 billion deaths so far, with the rate accelerating as the swarm reaches more populated systems. These aren't just numbers, they're families and children who never voted to expel us. The statistics hit the council like a physical blow because they represented suffering on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. Entire species were being wiped out, including those that had abstained from the expulsion vote or actively opposed it. Admiral Tae-ho had remained silent during most of the debate, but now he stood to address the council that would determine humanity's future. 5 years ago, I led our people out of coalition space. We left not because we were forced to, but because we chose to maintain our dignity in the face of betrayal. His voice carried the authority of someone who had guided humanity through its darkest period. We return for the same reason, because we choose to. Because that's what humans do. We don't let genocides happen on our watch, even when the victims have wronged us. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that reflected the full spectrum of human emotion, from anger to compassion. Remember why we went to space in the first place. It wasn't for territory or resources. It was to be part of something larger than ourselves, to prove that intelligence and compassion could triumph over fear and hatred. The final vote was closer than many expected, but the result was decisive. Humanity would return to the galaxy that had expelled them not for gratitude or recognition, but because their conscience demanded it. They would risk everything to save civilizations that had betrayed them because that was who they chose to be. Fleet Admiral Su-jin announced the decision to assemble human forces throughout dark space. Effective immediately, all human military assets will prepare for Operation Redemption. We return to coalition space not as conquerors, but as guardians, doing what we have always done, standing between the darkness and those who cannot protect themselves. The die was cast, and humanity prepared to gamble its future on the belief that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was safe. The human fleet emerged from quantum tunnel space like avenging angels materializing from the void itself. Admiral Tae-ho stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, watching as 1,000 ships suddenly appeared in normal space, where moments before there had been nothing but dying stars and the advancing void swarm. The quantum tunnel technology had worked perfectly, bringing the entire human war fleet across 5 years of distance in mere weeks. But the sight that greeted them was worse than anyone had imagined. Whole systems were dark, where thriving civilizations had existed. The galaxy's spiral arms were dimming as ancient machine entities consumed the life force of worlds that had endured for millions of years. Captain So-young commanded the flagship's weapon systems, and her voice carried across all human frequencies. This is the Human Federation fleet to all surviving coalition forces. Stand down and let us work. We know how to fight these things. The few remaining alien ships scattered throughout the region responded with confusion and desperate hope. Most coalition forces had been destroyed or were hiding in nebulae and asteroid fields, hoping to avoid detection by entities that could phase through normal matter. They had watched their most powerful weapons fail completely against an enemy that seemed immune to physical laws. Human ships? "This is Admiral Krelthon of the Zenthari Defense Force," came a transmission from a battered cruiser. "We have lost everything. Our weapons cannot touch them, and our shields provide no protection. How do you expect to succeed where we have failed?" Admiral Tae-ho activated the fleet communication system and broadcast his response on all frequencies. "Admiral Krelthon, you fought bravely with the tools you had, but the Void Swarm operates outside normal physics. We learned to fight in dark space, where reality follows different rules." Commander Min-soo led the first wave of Void Fighter squadrons into combat against swarm entities that had been harvesting a Caribbean agricultural world. The human fighters used quantum phase drives to slip between dimensions, striking at the ancient machines from angles that shouldn't exist in normal space. "Target acquired," Min-soo reported as his squadron engaged swarm vessels the size of cities, initiating quantum disruption attack on primary harvester vessel. The human weapons worked differently than anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of trying to destroy matter, they attacked the probability fields that allowed the swarm to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Quantum disruptor beams forced the ancient machines back into normal space, where they became vulnerable to conventional physics. Engineer Da-Un coordinated the technical aspects of the battle from her command ship, watching as human innovations developed during exile proved effective against enemies that had seemed invincible. "The quantum anchoring systems are working," she reported. "We're forcing them to maintain single-dimensional existence, but the Void Swarm had numbers that defied comprehension. For every ancient machine the humans destroyed, 10 more emerged from the spaces between dimensions. The entities had been expanding across the cosmos for millions of years, accumulating resources and energy from countless extinct civilizations. Director Hei-Wan analyzed the enemy's tactical responses and identified a crucial weakness. They're adapting to our quantum weapons, but slowly. Their intelligence is vast, but distributed across too many units. If we can strike at their central coordination node, we might be able to disrupt their entire network." The central coordination node was located deep within the swarm's collective consciousness, a quantum entity that existed partially outside normal space-time. Reaching it would require a direct assault through dimensional barriers that could tear apart any ship not specifically designed for void walking. Captain Wu Jin volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. "I'll take my ship through the dimensional barriers and plant the quantum cascade device directly in their central consciousness. The explosion should collapse their anchor points and trap them in a reality loop." Admiral Tae-Ho wanted to refuse, but he knew Wu Jin was the best pilot they had for navigating the twisted space around the swarm's core. "Captain, the quantum cascade device requires manual guidance. You won't be able to escape the detonation." "I understand, sir," Wu Jin replied calmly. "Tell the galaxy we came back not for glory, but because it was right." While Wu Jin prepared for his final mission, the rest of the human fleet engaged in the largest space battle in galactic history. Thousands of ships fought across multiple star systems as humanity's quantum weapons slowly pushed back entities that had consumed entire civilizations. Lieutenant Yuri coordinated communications between scattered human forces and surviving coalition ships that were trying to assist despite their technological limitations. "All human squadrons be advised, we have Velthron ships moving to support your attack on Harvester Group 7. The alien assistance was largely symbolic, since their weapons remained ineffective against swarm entities, but the gesture mattered to humans who remembered that not every coalition species had voted for their expulsion. Some aliens had tried to stand with humanity and were now fighting alongside them again. Scientist Bo-Ra monitored the quantum effects of the battle and made a disturbing discovery. "The swarm is trying to adapt our own technology against us. They're learning to manipulate probability fields and dimensional barriers." The ancient machines were more intelligent than anyone had realized. They could analyze human weapons and develop countermeasures given enough time. The battle was becoming a race between human innovation and machine adaptation, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Captain So-Young coordinated the fleet's movements as human ships used void-walking technology to appear and disappear throughout the battle zone. "All vessels maintain quantum phase synchronization. Don't let them predict our position patterns." The human tactics relied on unpredictability and rapid dimensional shifts that confused the swarm's targeting systems. But the ancient machines were beginning to anticipate human movements as their distributed intelligence processed data from thousands of encounters. Captain Wu Jin began his final approach toward the swarm's central consciousness, guiding his ship through dimensions where space and time folded back on themselves. His hull groaned under stresses that would have destroyed any conventional vessel, but human void-walking technology held together long enough for him to reach his target. "Command, this is Wu Jin approaching the core entity," he transmitted through quantum channels. "The cascade device is armed and ready for deployment. Tell my family I died doing what humans do best." The quantum cascade weapon was humanity's most advanced creation, designed to collapse dimensional barriers and trap entities in recursive reality loops. But it required precise placement within the enemy's consciousness matrix and manual detonation to ensure proper targeting. "Device deployed and activated," came Wu Jin's final transmission. "See you on the other side." The explosion that followed was visible across multiple dimensions as the swarm's central consciousness collapsed into a quantum singularity. Ancient Machines that had operated for millions of years suddenly found themselves trapped in repeating loops of cause and effect that prevented them from taking meaningful action. Admiral Tae-ho watched as swarm entities throughout the galaxy began shutting down like machines whose power source had been cut. Captain Wu Jin has done it. The central coordination node is destroyed and the swarm is collapsing. Without their guiding intelligence, the individual swarm entities reverted to basic programming that made them vulnerable to conventional attacks. Coalition forces that had been helpless against the invaders suddenly found their weapons effective against confused and disorganized machines. Director Hei-wan monitored the aftermath as galactic civilizations slowly began to recover. The quantum cascade is spreading through their network. Harvester vessels are returning to dormant status and phasing back into deep void where they can't affect normal matter. The battle was over, but the cost had been enormous. Trillions of beings were dead, and entire star systems lay barren where the swarm had fed. The galaxy would never fully recover from the damage, but enough survived to begin rebuilding what had been lost. Captain So Young compiled casualty reports from the human fleet, and the numbers were sobering. We lost 30% of our ships and 40,000 personnel. The swarm's final counterattack was more desperate than we expected, but humanity had achieved something that seemed impossible. They had defeated an enemy that had consumed galactic civilizations for millions of years, using technology and tactics that no other species could have developed. The victory belonged to human innovation born from exile and hardship. Ambassador Kyung-min received communications from surviving coalition governments, offering humanity anything they wanted in gratitude for saving what remained of galactic civilization. They're offering us leadership of the reformed coalition, complete territorial autonomy, and unlimited resources for reconstruction. Admiral Tae-ho considered the offers and made his response to the assembled alien representatives. We don't want your gratitude. We don't want your territory. We just want you to remember when the darkness came, humans stood in the light. And when you needed us most, despite everything, we came home. The galaxy would indeed remember. On every surviving world, monuments were erected bearing the same inscription.